patience and time. Thanks, Rachel, with any technical difficulties that may arise, but we appreciate all of you coming out and being here to support GAU and also to hear how we're going to bargain this semester. So I just wanted to give a little outline of how the bargaining session is going to go today. So first I wanted to give introductions because we do have a lot of new members on our UF bargaining team, and then we'll go into a little bit of how these in-person Zoom hybrid formats are going to go for the remainder of the semester. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about GA living conditions and do a recap of our previous bargaining from our fiscal year 21 to 22, and then go into really what the bulk of this conversation is going to be about, which is our current proposal and discussion of current proposal between both bargaining teams. There is going to be a little bit of time at the end for a public forum, and I'll get into a little bit more details about that and the format of that coming soon. So first, we wanted to start off with a few introductions. For the UF-GAU bargaining team, my name is Amanda Marquis. I'm the current chief bargainer. I'm a second-year master's student in the School of Natural Resources and Environment, and I've been serving as the chief bargainer. This is my first term, so it's really nice to be here.
Cool. My name is Bryn. I am the other co-president. Rachel is obviously the other one, and I have been co-president for a year now. I'm going to stay on for another year.
And I'm Sikander. I'm in my third year of being a GA, and this is my, I've been in the bargaining team for a year now.
And Rachel is obviously on Zoom, so she'll be with us next time. Rachel, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. So I am co-president, outgoing co-president, member of the bargaining council. I've been involved with GAU bargaining for about 4 years now. So sad to miss the first in-person one, but I am here virtually with you all.
Awesome. And then did you all want to do your introductions?
Sure. So my name is Patrick Keegan. This is not quite been here for 2 months. I've recently joined the provost team, and I'll be serving as the chief bargainer for the university. And it's very nice to meet all you in person.
I'm Olivia Wiseman. I'm associate counsel with the general counsel's office, and look forward to working with you.
And I'm Tom Kelleher, Associate Dean for Academic Affairs with the Graduate School.
Morning, Robert Cancelleri, Director of Employee Relations, part of UFHR.
Brooke Mercier is the Vice President of UF Human Resources.
Thank you all. Cool. So now I'm going to go a little bit into just how the session formats are going to go. This is obviously kind of untraditional. We have in-person, we have an audience, we have Zoom. We've kind of got a lot going on here. So the general format for how these sessions will go is a recap of the previous session will be the first thing that happens. I feel like that would be a good way to get everybody on the same page, since we have folks who may jump in and out of our sessions or may not attend all of them consecutively. After we discuss a quick recap of our previous session, I'm hoping that we can go directly into a discussion of the current proposal or counter proposal in that case. And then the remaining time will be spent for public comment and then followed by a private UF-GAU member debrief. Specifically, I'll talk about the format for the public comment later. Did anybody have any questions before we get into the actual?
Yeah, would you mind going back?
Yeah, absolutely.
So when you say recap of previous session, is this going to be something that like GAU is going to prepare in advance?
Yeah, sorry. It'll be a few minutes of GAU just discussing for a lot of the bulk of people on Zoom or anyone who just hadn't attended the previous session. Here's a quick 30-second recap of what you missed last time. This is our current proposal and where it stands.
Would it be valuable then to maybe have a staggered start to give you time to meet with your members and do that? I mean, if you don't need anything from us to do that, I'm not so sure. Or do you want us to be here while you do that?
It's more of just like a 30-second intro. It's
right.
not really a whole thing. It's more just to get everyone on the same
Fair
page.
Just logistically, do we have another room to do like separate caucuses? Like if our team wanted to break out?
Yeah, I hadn't thought about, we were actually discussing that just yesterday, I think. I'm not sure if we have booked 2 rooms, and this was kind of just like the pilot, so to say. So to kind of see how this format goes, and then if we needed to adjust and book separate rooms for our caucuses in real time, whenever we're discussing our proposals, I think that's something we can certainly do.
Great.
Are you anticipating giving a counter proposal today?
I doubt it.
Yeah, I doubt it.
I don't think so.
When you said you had a debrief at the end, I was thinking if we wanted to
Oh,
debrief,
yeah, sure.
you know,
Yeah.
Absolutely.
we can find a separate space, but just moving forward.
Right.
if we
I think
wanted
that's a
do
good
that,
thing to
probably
consider for next time.
So, and I will also claim new person rookie mistake. I did not realize that we have to actually pay for this room.
Oh.
So there is a cost associated with this room. So I think we may have to talk about logistically whether we can
Yeah.
do this.
Yeah.
Because I didn't find that out afterwards.
Yeah, I didn't know
So,
either, because usually we
um,
can reserve rooms that
so
are not at a cost.
most of them you can, but the ones in here specifically that have this kind of capacity and all the,
Yeah.
obviously there's folks that have to support it, so.
Yeah.
I think that's something we need to talk about as well.
Sure, yeah, I think it's a great idea. I did not know there was a cost either. So I think we can definitely, we can talk about other venues that we could
Okay.
use that wouldn't cost anything. Is everybody good to move on? Okay, perfect. So first I wanted to just discuss a little bit about GA living conditions, because this is really the heart of what a lot of us are here for today. Graduate assistants, we take up a huge majority of the UF population. We have over 4,000 employees, and we are both students, we are employees, we are mentors, we keep our labs afloat. There's a lot that GAs do for the university that is super valuable and that we put a lot of our effort into. Despite this, GAs are still making the bare minimum, especially in terms of Florida cost of living. In August of 2021, we had sent out a stipend survey to kind of get a feeler for how folks are affected by our current stipend, how is their financial stability with the current conditions of our stipend. And I wanted to share a few of the results here with you all before we get started today. So our survey highlighted 6 areas of needs for GAs across the board, including food, living expenses, housing, transportation, medical attention, and issues with stable income. Of our respondents, 30% had reported that they were unable to pay for sufficient groceries due to lack of money from our stipends. More than half of our respondents were unable to afford healthier foods due to lack of money. 72% responded that they could not afford general living conditions, including but not limited to groceries, rent, transportation, utilities, university fees, basically everything that we need outside of academia to maintain our livelihood on our current stipends. About half of our respondents reported having to complement their stipend with support from their family. And I think this is a really important one to note, because while there are a lot of us who are thankful and fortunate enough to have help from our families, there are a huge majority who are not able to do this. Graduate students come to graduate school as adults. We can't expect to complement our stipends with money from our family. There are international students who don't have the privilege of being able to complement money from their family, and this is their only source of income. So I really want to highlight that this is a huge and disappointing number, that there's 50% that have to seek other income aside from our current stipends. 50% of respondents approximately live with roommates because they can't afford to live alone. And again, this is huge because we are adults, and a lot of people who are international students come here with families. They come to the United States with their spouses, with their kids, and they have to support living on their own with roommates because they simply can't afford rent here in Gainesville on our current stipends. 8% of the GAs were surveyed to have abuse from their roommates, which is also an alarming statistic. It should be 0. It's really unfortunate that GAs have to put up with these unsafe living conditions because we can't afford to live on our own. 20% of our respondents said that they were unable to pay or were having to delay their payment of rent due to lack of money. And lastly, 50% of our total respondents were unable to afford or had to delay medical attention due to lack of money. And this is with the inclusion of Gator Grad Care. It's really unfortunate. We shouldn't have to wait to have these critical needs and have to put these on hold because we don't have the money to afford them. 40% of survey respondents were unable to afford or had to delay medical procedures due to lack of money. And these were just some of our quotes from our last bargaining session. We do not have to go through all of these, but again, the reason that we're here today is to discuss the heart of these issues, which are GA living conditions. Some of the most alarming ones that were quotes from some of our last bargaining sessions included, I had to pay for a medication on Sunday that was $270. That's one of 4 medications I pay for because I'm disabled and I have chronic health issues. We love our school, we want to thrive together because surviving does not say number 1, and surviving isn't going to maintain being number 1. My entire paycheck goes to rent alone. My entire salary pretty much pays for childcare. I have 3 children and food has gone up exponentially. And lastly, I feel no support from my school. I feel completely alone. I am suffering. I feel no support from my professors or anyone. So these are obviously really disheartening quotes and really disheartening statistics. And I just want to end this part of the presentation by stating that the cost of living calculator, the MIT cost of living calculator, I should say, reports that to live in Gainesville, Florida, a single adult must make $31,748 to live comfortably. Now, I know this isn't the only dynamic or the only demographic for graduate students, but it's a large majority are single with 0 children. So $31,748 is the number projected right now that would allow us to live comfortably. I should say also that this number fluctuates depending on inflation. So of the time that I've been a graduate student, as I've checked in with this cost of living calculator, it's varied between $31,000 to $35,000, all depending on what's going on in the world around us. And this again doesn't include graduate assistants who have kids, which would increase this cost exponentially. Graduate assistants ultimately should not have to compromise their comfortable living situations or have to choose between working and living a comfortable life. We should be able to coexist with both. So I just wanted to give a quick recap of our last proposal. So this was under our previous chief bargainer, Esteban. He did an incredible job working with the UF administrative bargaining team last year. And I wanted to give an update from then, from the proposals before Esteban to the time of his tenure. So during previous proposals, so this would have been the fiscal year 2020 to 2021, you'll see that middle column. These were the minimum stipends that were reported in our CBA. For a 9-month appointment in 2020 to 2021, a GA would make $16,000 versus $21,333 on a 12-month appointment. And lastly, the annual raise for fiscal year 2020 to 2021 was $100. Once Esteban and the bargaining team had finished bargaining negotiations for fiscal year 21 to 22, we were able to receive one of the largest raises in GAU history, with our minimum stipend of a 9-month appointment at $17,000 and $22,753 respectively for a 12-month appointment. And this also landed us in a 3% nominal raise, and we switched to percentage raises from a flat rate during this last bargaining proposal. This is largely, I believe, in part due to a lot of direct action activism that GAU had taken. Honestly, a lot of us and the bargaining committee on the greater GA student body felt like we weren't being heard. We felt like we couldn't have an open and honest conversation about the funds that provide us with our stipends, where that funding was coming from. It really felt like we weren't being honest and weren't having open communication, which is one thing that I'm really excited about, that we have a brand new fiscal bargaining team. I'm excited to hopefully open up those conversations and really get to the root of how we can make differences for these issues that have arisen. So that brings us to our current proposal for fiscal year 2022 to 23. And again, in this same format, I'm gonna display the actual proposal with our marked changes in a little bit, but just as a quick summary, from our previous proposal to our current proposal, we are now requesting for a 9-month appointment, the minimum of $28,875 for 9-month appointees and $38,500 for 12-month appointees with a 5% percentage raise. And if you'll notice, these are the exact same digits that we asked for last time. We think that we have a strong argument, and we're again just asking for a living wage. We have asked for these values before, and we're going to keep pushing for this number because we think that it's a reasonable number for a living wage for GAs, especially in the state of Florida. One of the reasons why we're deciding to stick with the same request and essentially the same proposal that we had when we started fiscal negotiations last year is because of this whole top 5 initiative, right? So UF takes this top 5 initiative incredibly seriously in every other aspect except for stipends. University of Florida may be in the top 5, but they're certainly not top 5 in university pay. If we look at our competing top 5 university, the University of Michigan, we'll see that based on their 2022 to 2023 CBA, they, depending on their FTE, a 0.5 FTE appointment can make up to $36,000 a year. So they pay their students by term, so by fall term versus spring term. However, if you do a little bit of math, you can see that at least the minimum, they prioritize the minimum stipend at their university, paying by term at $24,055, term being a 4 calendar month period. The cost of living calculator, if we're using this same tool for both Dearborn and Ann Arbor, Michigan, you'll see that the top 5 University of Michigan is very comparable to Gainesville, at least more comparable than some of the University of California schools, some of the higher cost of living schools. For Dearborn, Michigan, a single adult must make around $33,700 to live comfortably. students who are on a 0.5 FTE make $36,072, which is far above their minimum cost of living. This is the most comparable, again, in terms of cost of living to Gainesville, with ours at $31,748. And this simply shows that University of Michigan prioritizes GA wages, and they pay them higher or more comparable to their own cost of living. There's no reason why University of Florida can't do the same. There's also a lot of federal support showing that we need to have higher than $17,000 as our minimum stipend. There was a recent report that came out in 2022 from the Federal Department of Education, specifically the Office of Sciences, being quoted in their report to show that a living wage that is reasonable would be $45,000 for graduate students. However, last year during our sessions, one of the main reasons that the UF administrative bargaining team had said that they couldn't support our article was simply because they had to keep the lights on. And this is a really, this statement gave me a lot of cognitive dissonance, being able to communicate with you all and hearing UF doesn't have the money, UF needs to keep the lights on. And I understand very well that certain funds can only be appropriated to certain areas. However, when graduate students hear from administration that we have to keep the lights on, and then we turn our heads and see headlines along the lines of UF has raised $775 million during the Go Gator campaign. UF will spend $300,000 on a swimming pool who will be used by one single person on campus. And University of Florida is given a $100 million, the largest gift in history. We get a lot of frustration because you're telling us one thing, but we're seeing other things. So getting clarity on some of these issues, I think would relieve a lot of tension that GAs feel. So in summary, we're proposing a comparable minimum stipend to our top 5 competitor, the University of Michigan, who I believe currently is tied for 4th with us, but I would have to double check. For a 9-month appointment, we're requesting $28,875. And for a 12-month appointment, we're requesting again $38,500. We are prioritizing as a unit to bring up the minimum stipend, as by bringing up the minimum stipend, it will positively impact those who are marginalized and who are affected by minimum stipends the most. We are also opposed to one-time payments written into our contract and in favor of building a more stable and long-term infrastructure for our wages. It feels very haphazard to have one-time payments written into our contract because this doesn't ensure that future graduate students will continue to get raises and continue reaching a minimum wage. It really feels like just a one-time chunk of payment, and we'd rather prioritize a more long-term solution. And that brings us to our discussion where I'll leave up, let me see if I can move some of this away. Leave up our current marked changes. One thing I do want to highlight that was maybe a little bit unclear in the presentation due to my fault. For our raise, when we say that we would, for our 10.3 annual raise, we would like to switch back to a flat rate, but the value of the flat rate, we're requesting 5% of the minimum stipend. So that's where this value is coming from. So as you'll see here, the changes that we're implementing are mostly to the minimum, with our 9-month and 12-month appointments changed respectively, and our annual raise changing from 3% to a flat rate equal to 5% of the minimum stipend we're requesting.
$5% of the new.
Sorry, 5% of the new minimum, yeah. As opposed to 5% of their current salary, because again, folks who are making less than the minimum or just at the minimum are not, the 3% is going to affect them greater if we are taking it of the minimum we're requesting from.
I've got just a couple brief questions before we probably caucus and go talk about this.
Sure.
The first one is, do you happen to have this kind of in a written format?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and email it.
Email it to me?
Yeah, I'll email this to you.
And then the other thing is, if you have the source material for the stuff, if you could send that too, that'd be great.
Sure.
So we get a chance to look at that. Because I also looked at That was one of the comparators that I looked at. My calculation was considerably different. So I'd love to see kind of what documentation you were looking at and compare it to kind of the research I had done.
Sure.
So if you would email that to me, does anybody else on the team have questions? Because if not, I'm probably going to call for a caucus so that my own team can kind of respond.
Yeah.
We'll come back probably with questions for y'all.
Okay.
So questions? No? All right, good. We're going to go ahead and we're going to find somewhere.
Sure. Yeah, sure. Next time
We'll
we will
sort that
I'll
out.
sort it out. Definitely before the end of this meeting, we can talk about
Alright,
the venue for
We'll be
next time.
back in a little bit.
Awesome. Thank you.
Too, but I don't know if I have, so I can either shoot you a text or whatever to let you know when we're on our way back. I'll just email it when we're on our way back in.
Okay. Sounds good.
And if you would just email that to me in the meantime, so.
Yeah.
I can pull it up.
I'm gonna go ahead and stop sharing.
All right, see you in a little while.
Awesome. Thank you.
All right, so appreciate you giving us some time to sort of talk about what you had proposed to us. Obviously, you all have put a lot of time and research into your work, so I want to let you know how much we appreciate that. Clearly, you have sought out input from your stakeholders. That's very valuable, not only to you, but also to us to demonstrate good faith with what you're presenting and bargaining. And you have given us quite a lot to think about. I will be honest, I wasn't exactly sure what to expect. I know that you had brought some interesting proposals before, but again, I've been here less than 2 months. So you and I, we have not had time to really work together. So I wasn't exactly sure what to what you were going to be bringing today, which is perfectly fine. We obviously have quite a bit of work to do to go back and consider a lot of what you have to say, but I would like to sort of offer a couple things to think about. Typically, and hopefully you'll learn from me while I'm here over time, my interest in attempting to form agreement. What I attempt to do is identify interests that may be shared between both groups, and then talking about how can we together find mutual ground on that particular interest. And in reviewing not only the contracts, but the history of bargaining, I think one of the possible shared interests that we both have may be, for your consideration, to work on reorienting the timing of what your all raises are with the rest of the university. Because I find it somewhat problematic and difficult sometimes to work on an implementation on a January 1 timeline when the rest of the university typically works on October 1 implementation timeline. And I think it's a little confusing as I went back through the various years of bargaining, and even in conversation with my team, I'm not sure where that started. It doesn't necessarily matter. I just think that there may be some value for both sides if we could take a look at saying, well, what if we treated this large employee group very similar to the way we treat the other ones? And then we're kind of all working at the same, in terms of timing, all working at the same time. Kind of what it feels like to me. My impression is we kind of get done with everybody else, and then we talk to you all. And I'm not so sure that that is, I don't know if that was the intention. And again, I'm not here. I have very little institutional knowledge because I've only just arrived, but I think that there may be an interest in both of us in maybe getting that reoriented. Now, what does that mean if we were to explore an option that would be more of a short-term agreement with a commitment to come back to the table on a shorter time frame? You know, I would like to think that there may be some possibility and capacity there for us to see a common interest in maybe doing that and reorienting. So I would put that, again, I don't have a formal proposal, but I give that to you as a think about as we sort of depart and get ready for the next session. I think that our team will probably be bringing something about that. And again, it feels odd to me that we would worry about one group at a completely different time than every other group of employees. And like I said, maybe there's some institutional reason. I'm not aware of it if there is one. And I'd be interested to hear what you all had to say about that, or if you thought there was some possibility to work together on that. The other thing that I wanted to share in terms of our interest is in considering and working through, as I did some of my research on the employee end, it seems that 54% of the GAs are funded through general funding, but 46% are actually funded through grants and awards.
Mhm.
So when we talk about proposals, any proposal really, but certainly proposals of the size that you have identified, there's a lot of consideration that must be given to awards that have already been granted and earned.
Mhm.
And then what are the financial implications of attempting to sort of reconsider what may or may not have already been awarded? And as I had shared with some of you, and I'll share with your entire team, you know, I've been in this business a while, but I'm relatively new to higher ed, and I'm not as well versed in understanding all the mechanics that go into the composition of grant funded versus general funded. So that's some work that I have to do on my own to learn some of that. But I would just point out to you that I think that particular statistic, the larger and larger the proposals get, becomes more and more of something that we have to attempt to address. Because like I said, 4.5 out of every 10 GAs do not work out of operational dollars. They work actually off awarded earnings.
So sorry, what do you anticipate being the problem there? I know you said you're not so totally familiar yet with the.
Well, I think it more has to do with if someone is working on a multi-year award and that award was proposed and earned based on certain calculations. And then on the back end, we tell them that, look, that GA, you may have won a proposal, won an award under a certain calculation, but now that the contract, which you didn't have any necessarily on directly, has fundamentally changed and your expenses have gone up dramatically, that additional money may or may not be in that grant award. And so it's going to obviously would have to come from somewhere. The exact way that would be implemented, that's what I have to go back and do more work on. And there's some folks that I have to talk to and learn how that's been done in the past, to what extent it can be accomplished, what are the limitations, what are the barriers, what are the certain thresholds of funding, all those types of things. It gets pretty technical. But it's not like 10% of the group, it's 46% of the group. So it's not like we can probably pretty easily deal with this handful. It's not, it's roughly half.
Right.
So
Sure.
that's something else to consider. But I go, there's not a lot of time left, but I also want to be respectful of if you have particular folks that you want to make sure get an opportunity, we've been able to give you some, not specific responses, but responded to what you had given, and I want to be respectful for those that may have come and wanted an opportunity to speak. So I
Yeah.
would give the balance of your time back to you and your folks.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you guys so much for caucusing and for letting us know and opening up the dialogue. I did want to mention just before we open it up to public comment that I totally agree that grant funding is a huge contributor to GA employment here. But the whole reason that we're trying to kind of focus on bringing that minimum up is essentially so that PIs can use that as a resource when applying for future grants, because it'll kind of continue to be cyclic where we can't really jump in and you understand. But I'm more than happy to continue doing more research and talking about it, because that is a huge proportion of the GA population. Do you guys have any questions or anything before we open it up to public comment? Okay, so for public comment, the format is pretty much the same as how it was when we were doing our bargaining sessions, primarily on Zoom. You have community members, if you feel compelled to speak, or if you have any questions or comments, Rachel Hartnett, our co-president, will be moderating the chat. So please raise your hand if you would like to speak. We ask that your public comment be limited to 3 minutes per person to provide enough people with time if they wish to speak. And if you don't wish to speak and just wish to put your comments in the chat, we can also have somebody moderate and read relevant questions and comments from the chat. Yeah, and we have until 12 also.
So that's a good clarifying point. And so let me ask this in your proposal. I didn't read it that if they were under a minimum, they wouldn't get it. I read it as everybody would get it. The 1164, I think the number was.
The
I thought
one-time
you had
payment?
suggested that applying to everyone, even if they were over a minimum.
Oh, so
Yes,
there's
yes,
the raise
that's
component.
So it means you're
Oh,
going to get
sorry.
them, in the minimum wouldn't be affected, but they would still be entitled to the proposal money. So they would still kind of impact, at least that was my understanding.
Right.
Okay.
Anyone on Zoom? What's up, Ahe?
Yeah, just a comment about grants. To me, it seems like 46% of the student body or the graduate student body being funded through grants would be a good thing for the university, because it's outside money compensating almost half of the employees, and that should help the university have a little bit more money to help everybody else. To me, a lot of people being funded by grants sounds like it should make it easier to fund everybody in a good way.
And the university takes up 50% overhead anyways.
I'm really sorry, but could someone repeat the question? It's really just hard to hear the questions here on
Yeah,
Zoom. I'm
so
sorry.
No, you're good. So Ape was just saying that basically, since it seems like half of GAs are funded on grants, that's a lot of money that the university doesn't have to furnish for stipends. So that should seem like a beneficial thing.
And I think to that point, it makes it simpler from a funding perspective. What makes it more difficult is the fact that the university obviously has to work with the individual PI about the administration of that grant.
Yeah.
So especially if they're in their 3rd or 4th year, to require them to reallocate their budget is something that can be problematic and feels very heavy-handed. If it was my grant and I had worked it out a certain way and then was told as I was working through that grant that I had to reallocate my money, I'm not saying it's impossible. I'm just saying we need to be respectful and appropriately take the input of the individual administrators of the grants, especially if they're the winner of that grant. That's all I'm saying. Not impossible. We just have to be respectful.
Great. I did also want to speak do we have any questions? Towards the, wait, oh, sorry, okay.
Hang on a second, go ahead. Oh, is there something in chat?
Just kind of clarifying question. I think you mentioned the 50% overhead.
Approximately, right?
The IDC for NSF grants, the overhead that's taken.
Okay. There's a fringe benefit pool, right?
Mhm.
That's added on salaries for all GAs. I'm
Right.
not familiar with the NSF that you're talking about. The fringe benefit pool is like about 12%.
Yeah, that's for GA benefits,
Yeah.
for FTE, but for the NSF IDC, which
Thank
is just the overhead, yeah, that's 52%. Is this increase only to the minimum from Meredith?
No, so there has yeah, so the proposal is to increase the minimum stipend, which would obviously increase everyone who is below that current level. But it would also has a raise component as well. It's 5% raise across the board.
And your calculation does that after, so the minimum goes in effect, and the raise goes on top of it. Right? That's the order that you all. are doing.
Yeah,
Did you happen to do a calculation? Did you happen to do a cost calculation? Or you figured it out?
of how much it'll cost to bring everyone up to the minimum.
If we implemented, what was the total cost of your proposal?
Yeah, so it depended on entirely, there were two different factors that it was dependent on. One, I believe Bryn told me that the university is trying to phase out hiring people under 0.5 FTE. Can someone
Yeah.
confirm that?
I don't know.
Yeah,
Of any, I
but-
don't know of any that have hired under 5 FTE.
For recruited new PhD students.
Mhm.
0.5
Is the
is the new minimum.
Okay, that's good to know, because our calculations don't take FTE into account because it still includes folks who are under 0.5 FTE. I would say about a third of them are below 0.5 FTE. So to get our calculations, which may be a little inaccurate, we just brought everybody's base pay up to the minimum based on if they were below 0.5 FTE or sorry, below, 0.5 FTE for 9 months or 12 months. And for the entire proposal, let me actually go ahead and
So
just
this cost is probably more expensive than the actual cost because
Like,
it
you
puts
might have
everyone at a
master's
0.5.
students, for example, that are
Yeah.
less than-
Yeah,
okay.
Mhm.
and doesn't take into account, again, which are being paid from grants versus which are being paid from state funds. Let me just open this up real quick. And these were from our fall 2022 appointees. And yeah, so based on this increase for the total, including 12-month and 9-month, it's a $46,000, or sorry, $46 million proposal. For 12-month alone, this is a 28 million, and then for 9-month, it's 17 million approximately.
Is that inclusive of fringe or?
No, it's just entirely from bringing the base pay, the annual rate up to the minimum.
And then did you multiply the number of GAs times the dollar amount, or is this just the minimum?
This is just the minimum. So this is essentially, this is our entire list. I actually don't want to keep this up because it does have some personal information in it. But for
Just to address them.
just to adjust the minimum, this is our entire GA student body, and we just have their annual rates with their UFID associated, and then bring up, sort it by appointment. So whether it's a 9-month or 12-month, and just bring them up.
Back in the napkin, it would be that times the fringe plus 6,200-ish or 6,400 times the 1164 times the fringe in addition, right? Because that's what you recommended was after going and giving everyone also.
Yeah, the raise after the minimum, right? So
Right.
this is the bare bones. Like I just did this very rough before the meeting, so we had some kind of calculation. But again, prior to having our formal bargaining session, I would really enjoy if we could have like an open conversation about the budget. It could come with questions and calculations.
Which, yeah, can
beforehand.
you help me understand? I want to make sure I'm prepared for the next
Yeah,
one. So to
yeah.
the extent that you're gonna have to give me some, I mean, just the budget, it's such a gnarly beast. What specific types of things, so I can make sure that we can get as much information as possible? What specific kind of question? And you know, if you
Yeah.
want to just email them to me, maybe.
Sure, I can
that
email
would be
them to
great.
you, but some of them just out of a ballpark are like, where does all graduate student funding come from? I know some people who get funded specifically from the state, some people get funded by grants,
Mhm.
but we have never had an open conversation with someone from the fiscal department to know, where is this money coming from? How is it being requested? Where are the numbers coming from when you're requesting these funds? How are you kind of adapting to those rates and taking into account things like cost of living, things like rent? We just want to know how that money, and we obviously can't ask how is all of UF spending money, because that's obviously not all of your jobs to know. But we do want to know which pools of monies GAs are able to pull from, because we don't know where our money comes from. We don't know really anything about it. Some of us are paid by specific grants, like you said. So like a lot of it is departmentalized and really difficult to track down.
Yeah.
And I totally understand that. But in terms of like in the case that UF has to help supplement graduate student pay for people who are making under the minimum, where does that money come from? Are there different pools of money across different legislations that we can ask for? I know that Provost Glover had requested, I believe last year, requested $5 to $6 million specifically for raises in GA pay from the state. And there was no follow through or follow up with where that money was being requested from. We just kind of are in the dark and want a little bit more clarity on things like that. But I'd be happy to draft up like a proposal of questions so that, yeah, I know the budget is a beast and we can kind of succinctly ask more questions so we can.
It's gonna honestly, it's gonna take me some time.
Yeah,
to know who the
yeah.
right person is to answer the question, let alone have you an answer.
Right,
So
and I
if can
totally
get some time
understand.
in advance, that would be very helpful.
Sure.
But we would like someone to have those answers.
Sure.
Because in the past, it's been like a big kind of
So
obstacle to having
I
a
got it.
negotiation.
yeah, I think that's fair. I think that what might help, based on the way you kind of asked your question, it may be instructive for us to do some samples or examples as opposed to everyone individually. I don't know what would go into, because some GAs are individually on one grant, right?
Right.
And there are thousands of GAs that are on those grants. So I don't even know if we have it in one database, person by person, that would say, okay, this one person is on this one grant and has access to these funds, as
Mhm.
opposed to saying, okay, look, here are a sample of cases.
Sure.
And this is kind of how it works. And then maybe we can drill down a little bit farther once we sort of show you what the basic structures are.
Right.
And again, that's purely off the top of my head, and it's very conceptual because I honestly don't know how many different 100 types of cases there are.
Right.
Because we didn't even address them. We haven't talked about it. Some of them are even split funded. So
Right.
maybe they're partially general and partially grant. And then it gets into a whole other sort of rabbit hole of 60% of that person is funded this way, but the other 40% is funded this way. And then in that 40%, it's further split funded. So
Mhm.
it can get pretty gnarly.
Right. Yeah.
So,
I'm
yeah.
split funded, so I totally understand. But I think that's a great idea, having like a sample pool of folks who are funded from various types of funding pools so that we can at least talk
Sure.
about it in a way that makes sense instead of just these very abstract.
Yeah,
You
we can-
okay?
we can get you some better information. I don't want to keep talking because some maybe others.
Sure.
folks have some
Yeah,
comments.
yeah, absolutely. Anyone on Zoom have any questions? Or comments?
There's nothing in the chat currently, no.
Ava?
Oh, there is one more question.
Okay, Ava's gonna say her comment and then I'll go ahead and read the one from the chat.
One thing that scares me with all this like administrative talk, and I know that it is something that has to be dealt with, I'm scared that it's going to detract from the real issue, which is that GAs cannot live, right? The issue is not figuring out if there is a way to make it work. The issue is, we have to make it work and we have to figure it out. And then there is a whole administrative puzzle that has to be solved. It's not a question of if it gets solved. It's a question of, how it gets solved, right? So yeah, one of my biggest fears is that these bargaining sessions will turn into a talk about how you guys don't really know how to make the puzzle work, and then that gets off track from GA's need a living wage. And let's ensure that they have a living wage. I am not at the minimum. I make 19,000 something, less than 20,000. Currently, the first 2 years I am currently, this is my last year of the second year with a 12-month contract. And that is paid, I think, because of the grant, right? But then it switches to 9 months. And it's 9 months with 19,000 something dollars. And I'm just like anxious at the prospect of having to live on $672 a month. And my rent is $9. Like, it's not doable. And that is the issue that these sessions have to resolve. And that, I'm not at the minimum that you guys have. I'm not at 17K. So I don't know how, I'm gonna make it, and I don't know how other people who are currently at the minimum on 9 months make it.
We have one comment in the chat from Sam, and it said, would it be useful for us to try to gain information from PIs with grants that fund our stipends to provide examples of how this would work on an individual level? I don't think that that's the responsibility of anyone in the audience to try and get. I'm sure that the UF administrative bargaining team can find that information, but we appreciate the input and the help. Does anyone have any other questions? We're closing up in about 2 minutes. Actually, if anyone doesn't have any more questions, I'm probably going to go ahead and end this so that the UF administrative bargaining team and GAU can discuss our venue complications for next time. Okay, awesome. Well, I appreciate all of you coming to join us via Zoom and in person.